all of the exact same principles and lessons apply to dark user interface. It is just a lot more difficult to get right because of the fact if you go just a little bit too bright with any of your dividers or your colors, it's going to show up a lot more dramatically than it would if you were just using a regular light background. Dark mode for an app is often thought of as a feature when it's really changing some hex codes around. So why can't you just reverse out the images and make it look good? Well, let me ask you this. Does this image look good when I reverse out the colors like this? And the answer is no, it does not. So unless you want your interface to just not look that good, then you don't need to reverse out the colors. So purely reversing colors is not going to work. Another thing that is often not going to work is just using pure 100% black as your background for your app to be dark. There are some exceptions, and if you look at the new iPhones with the OLED display, you can see that, like for example, right here on the settings screen, you can see the dark black, 100% black background. It blends with the entire hardware of the phone because these are actually pixels that are turned off. Instead of full red, full green, full blue, these OLED pixels are actually fully turned off, so it blends seamlessly with the actual hardware. And there's not actually that many instances other than maybe a true OLED mobile phone where full black is going to make sense. And it does make sense to a certain point for these apps, but if you look at other apps inside of dark mode iOS, you can still see there's lots of places where there are lighter grays and different variation of color that just stands out a lot more than some of the lighter UIs. So I'm gonna dig into one of my old projects to just go over some of the hex code usage, some of the color usage, and really focus on how and why I'm using certain colors and certain styles for dark mode. So let's take a look at these screens right here. This is again the My Monero desktop app. I've got a sidebar here. Let me go to that background, sidebar base. That is another symbol. So check this out. I've got 161416. Now I don't believe I used a very explicit hue, saturation, brightness format on this particular project. What I did instead for this particular project was I ended up using a sequence of hex codes. So if this is my darkest color, 161416, you can think of these values as, so remember, this is red, this is green, and this is blue in hex code format. If I grab this inactive icon color that I'm using, this is 494749. So what I did on this particular, on these particular colors, I'm using this format. I'm removing some of the green in the hex code. So, and let me actually go monospace with this because it will make it a little bit easier to see. So a fully desaturated hex code of these would be 494949, just like that. And this would be 161616. So let's take a look at the actual HSB value of this. So this is actually 0% hue, 0% saturation for both of these. So these are fully desaturated, and let's just bump these up right against each other here. All right, so check this out. You can just barely see the difference here. This is kind of a rich purpley gray, and this is kind of a rich dark. It's got a bit of a saturation to it. And I covered a lot of this in the gray video, so this shouldn't come as a surprise that I'm not using a fully desaturated gray. This ends up becoming pretty critical in dark mode. If you were only using grayscale, it would have a little bit of a kind of a reddish, kind of dry feeling to it. So a lot of times I will add in a little bit of saturation to the hue, and in this case, I end up in the 300 range for the hue, and almost accidentally, because I'm pretty sure I did these with hex codes. but the way I did it was just removing some of the green. And another good example of this is the Twitter UI. I think if you go to twitter.com and you're looking at the display, you know, the default I think looks nice. I think you can totally get a good experience with the light design. And I actually love dark UI. I love dark UI, but I don't like dark UI when it's not done that well. And I don't think that this dim version, to me, it just has too much saturation. And I think a lot of these lines, they kind of stand out a little bit more than they do on the light UI because of the dark background. The same way that this light shines, and you can see it a lot more easily with all the dark background, you're gonna be able to see these borders a lot more easily on this dark background. So you have to be so subtle with your color selection. And then if you go to the display and do lights out, this is what they're doing here is they're just bringing everything to black, everything to full black. And this could work if it's an OLED display, but even then it just feels like these borders are now all over the place. All I can see are these borders and these bright icons, and the text it just feels like the contrast of the white on the black is vibrating a lot harder and a lot more powerfully than the dark text on the white background. Because we're used to seeing that. We're used to seeing the display on a default. And typically speaking, you're gonna have a slightly better reading experience if you're dark text on a light background. And again, it goes to personal preference. It goes back to what time of the day is it? Are you in bright sunlight or are you lying in bed? You know, there's a lot of factors that play into this, and it even depends on how bright you have your phone setting. And so if you have to kind of consider all of these. That's one reason why some sites or apps will go full black, but I just don't know if full black is really truly the answer here. All right, pardon the transition, but sometimes it's really difficult to film these videos and not bleed into the next day. So I'm coming at you from the next day, even though this is the same video. And it's gotten very cold, so I'm gonna stay bundled up. I don't wanna stay too long in the theory department of selecting colors and talking about how it can be difficult to design dark UI. What I really wanna do is get into an actual example and show you some of my thought process while I'm redesigning one of these dark UIs. So we have here, these are just a couple of screenshots that I've taken from the Garmin running app. I know it's kind of hard to see here with the extremely fast sped up video, but I'm gonna post a full length video down below. It's gonna be about an hour and a half. And I highly encourage you to check that out if you're interested to see all of the decision-making process while I'm going through here. But at a very high level, I'm really trying to focus on the typography and the layout and the negative space and visual hierarchy as the primary objective to really clean it up, and then go into all of the dark colors, tweaking the hues and everything. So I highly encourage you to check that out if you're interested to hear a kind of a play-by-play decision-making process on that full-length video. All right, so let's take a look at just kind of the high-level changes that we made on this little redesign. You can see right off the bat, really clear that the colors are much different, even though it's very subtle. Look at the difference between this black and this charcoal and this light gray and this border and this big block of text and this big block of border and then these blue. There's just a ton going on this screen. There's a lot going on. And don't get me wrong, this screen, the original screen, it's not bad, but I can tell right off the bat, like look at the negative space here and here. If anything, there should be, you know, less negative space between these two items than there would be around the top and the bottom. And that's what I did here, was just really working on the negative space and the typography, and really working on the typography and the layout first and getting that feeling right, and then coming in and adding color and adjusting color typically that is the process that I would use for really any layout, but especially for dark colors, dark UI. Making things dark, it's not gonna make it that awesome looking. So you really have to nail every aspect and then get in and fine tune your colors. So even for this particular design, I wouldn't necessarily consider this full on done, good to go, ship it. This is where I might get ready to pause here and say, okay, I've cleaned up the negative space, I've worked on some things, but there's still a few things that I want to tweak. Like maybe these numbers are too big. Maybe we do use a darker background for the top, or maybe we have custom icons instead of the standard ones. Now that it's getting to a better spot, now I might think, okay, well maybe these at 17 semi-bold, those could be medium. Maybe these numbers are actually too big. Maybe they should go down to 28. I might start tweaking things like that. But I would also make a copy of this before I started changing a lot of stuff. I might want to show someone like, this is what it looks like with the dividers. This is what it looks like without the dividers. And without the dividers, maybe there's a little bit more negative space. And maybe there's one where it's like, here's one without any background for any of this. And maybe we bring in the line. And there's different ways that we can see how this works. Maybe, it just it gives you a way to kind of explore and try to figure things out. And it just gives you a new baseline to work from. But I think once you get it to a point that you feel like the typography and the layout is a little bit more locked in, that is when using the color selection methods and really reducing the clutter of everything. Like, look how cluttered this one looks compared to this one. All it is a little bit of negative space around these things. Letting things breathe a little bit more and removing these big unnecessary dividers. Sometimes dividers like that might be necessary, but in this case, I think we really want to put the emphasis and work on our visual hierarchy to put it on the actual data. And instead of the big, could even play around with bringing in that secondary color as these are my runs. Maybe the personal records makes more sense to be in that color, especially if, they're kind of locked into that. And even these, actually, one thing I forgot here on the D5, we should put that at 210 as well and give that a tiny little bit of saturation, maybe a little bit more brightness. That might be a little bit too much saturation for the main white color. So I might be tempted to actually bring this down to just 4 or 5, maybe like right in there. But it just it puts everything in that same color space. But it's not quite as saturated as something like the Twitter dark mode. All right, long lesson this time, but I think it's worth recording these longer lessons so you can kind of peek over my shoulder and see the decision-making process as I'm doing it live. So for your homework, for the dark UI, I'm going to give you a couple of options here. I want you to take any one of your existing projects that you really were excited about and turn it into a dark mode, dark UI project. If you want something completely new, I'm going to provide a few more screenshots of existing apps like the Garmin and a few others down below. You choose any of those to redesign kind of the same way that I just did on this video. So you make your choice, or you could do both of them. I just don't want to overload you with too much work, but really think about, with dark UI, removing clutter, not too much visual contrast between white and black or any of the other elements. Try to get it almost as little contrast as possible between your structural colors, and then make sure that your other colors are really activated where they need to be activated. So lots of options to choose from for your dark interface designs. Pick something that you're excited about, that you would be proud to show off. And if you need to spend a little more time on it, then that's totally fine. But give yourself an hour or two to really dig into all the little details and make sure that color, even though it's a really important part, make sure that you're still nailing your typography and layout before you feel like you're done. And if you're having trouble, ask for some feedback from the group, but post your work and can't wait to see what you come up with.